So the cable management in our master bedroom is pretty awful. There's this power strip sitting here that we can't move because we have far too many things, and we can't use because if you move it, the cables fall behind the cabinet. So it's time to custom design a solution for the house that not only matches the aesthetic of our bedroom, but takes care of this problem once and for all. So, to fix the cable management problem in our bedroom, I'm going to use a bit of this beautiful block of Wenge, I think that's how it's pronounced, wood, which I got from my local hardwood supplier. It needs a little bit of cleanup. It's got some roughness on basically every face. And I'm going to DIY the exact same cable holder and then price it out in comparison from what I did to what it would have cost me if I purchased it. So this is gonna be a fun little challenge, sort of retrofitting a design, and let's just quickly break down exactly what cuts I'm going to be making. Now the first cut I'm going to be making is just to cut out a workpiece from this full stock. I'm cutting a 3-inch section off of the end of this block, and I'm trying to preserve as much as I can of the original block because I want to use this Wenge for some other projects down the line. Then we're going to make a series of cuts to form the general C shape for the cable holder. These are not going to be through the full thickness of the board and are going to be along the edge that we cut, so we're sure we're doing absolutely perpendicular to a perfectly straight cut. After that, we're going to be doing a 15-degree cut across the face to give it a nice taper and angle, so that way you can access the cables inside instead of them being buried under a lot of wood. And then we're going to reverse that and do a 20-degree cut on the back, just so you don't have a really awkward corner and it just looks a little bit fancier. Now, because you want to be able to count to 10 on just your hands, you want to make sure your fingers are never anywhere close to this blade. In fact, I'm not even plugged in right now, which is the only reason I feel at all safe being in this general area. I use these gripper push blocks so that I can maintain my hand a good 4 or 5 inches above the area that I'm working with, and I also make sure that this is not going to impact the blade. Wood, we want to cut through. Plastic, less so. These are not exactly cheap, but they're worth the money when it comes to maintaining your fingers. Fingers, definitely not, especially with US healthcare costs. So let's just set this all up, make sure all our safety gear is equipped, make sure we have proper eye and hearing protection, which I'll pop on, and then let's get our main cut going. Also, a very important thing to remember is to hook up your dust collection, especially when cutting through a gigantic block of wood. That would have been smart. And I'm serious about this one. Remember to turn on your dust collection. Dust was everywhere. I was finding it in my hair for hours after I had finished with the project. Okay, now that I've spent like 5 minutes cleaning up the dust for that, let's talk about the piece. We have this 3-inch wide piece. That is what we want our final thing to look at. Once you cut it smooth, it's pretty good. I'm gonna have to do sanding to clean up all of the other edges. But, so our profile of our piece is pretty much this, a simple C shape. We'll do an angled cut at the very end and make sure that it's all cut off nice and smooth, probably like a 15-20 degree angled cut. Cutting out a cavity from the center of this just through repeated small things. Since I don't have a dado stack, I'm gonna have to just make probably 5 or 6 cuts to go through it, and then cross-cutting each individual groove for each individual cable. I could probably fit about 6 or 8 in this piece. This is a bunch of table saw work. This is practically a 1-tool, maybe a 2-tool build to do the whole thing. So I'm just really excited that I'm gonna be able to power through this in about another hour or so. So time for a bit of a montage of all the quick cuts. Okay, now that we have our block, with our cavity where the cables are going to live cut out, even though not fully cleaned up, and we will get to that later. We need to figure out how many cables we can support in a block this long. I want at least 3/4 of an inch between each cable, and I know my block is just about 7¼ inches wide. Now I know that that gives me 9 possible positions where I can fit this through. And I'm gonna have a little bit extra on one end, which I will trim off to make sure that everything is symmetrical. I want 3/4 of an inch from every end gauge, and then I'm gonna trim off the extra 1/4 inch on one side just to make the thing evenly spaced. And for that, we're just gonna use the table saw again. We're gonna just make vertical cuts about halfway through the depth, all the way to the bottom of here, just short of that interior cavity, so that cables can be dropped in through each individual slot, but then not fall through the whole thing. And it has some weight still to it, so that each cable pulling on it, or all of them in total, won't pull the entire piece off of the desk. Then we're gonna give this a nice little 15-degree cut right at the end to make sure it's all nice, sand it, finish it. This is gonna be a 1-day project, pretty much done.
So actually, right after finishing that, I decided to go with a 7/8 inch gap between each of the cable placements. That gave me the most amount of cable placements I could get in this block, but also had the individual flanges between them be just a little bit thicker than 3/4 of an inch. It felt just a little too small given the general weight of the piece.
So I have my block with one channel, and I want to test this before I get much further and have to know whether or not the whole thing is just a wash. So I'll put it this way so you can see. I just have this very short cable which we use to charge our baby monitor. Look at that, nice and secure. It goes in relatively easily, and here's the most important part. You can retract and expand as you see fit. Now the only thing that I don't think I could test with this cable, because it's too short, is if you could just let it go and have the weight of the cable pull it down. And this cable is a little bit thicker shielded, so thinner ones like the iPhone Lightning cables I think should go very nicely. So this initial test is a success, and we can go through and make the rest of our cuts. Exciting.
After my test cable fit, I knew I was on the right track and I could go with a single pass for each of the individual channels. So I started just moving my fence over by 7/8 of an inch at a time and cross-cutting across the workpiece, making sure to go from the side that was going to be forward-facing and presentable to the back, which would be hidden and also trimmed off by that little taper cut that we're going to do at the end. After I had completed all of the cuts for the individual channels, I raised the blade so I'd be able to cut through the entire piece and performed one last cross cut to get the piece cut down to its final width.
Here we go. That is the gist of our cable holder. Now all we have to do now is make this look very pretty. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, you see that little angled spot right there? We're gonna tilt our blade, maybe about 15 degrees, maybe 20. I'll find a number that makes it look good. And then cut off in one motion both of the 2 legs. So that is a clean line going down the front. And then we'll do the same in opposite on the back to make sure there's some symmetry to it. Probably a shallower angle on the back because I don't want to risk breaking these channels too much. But let's set up the table saw, get our blade tilted to the proper angle, and then get those cuts done.
When it came to sanding and finishing, I sanded through several different grits of sandpaper, starting at 120 up to 180, and then finally to 220 until everything was just buttery smooth. I then had to go for some hand sanding for the interior of all of the channels, as well as inside the C cavity, since my power sander just won't fit into something that's only about an inch tall. After completing the hand sanding, it was time for finishing in that beauty shot that everybody loves. I just used some basic mineral oil for this. It's not going to be exposed to any waters or temperatures, and the piece doesn't need to be cooking safe, so I didn't need to bother with beeswax or something else a little bit more complicated. I messed up the framing about this a little bit, so you can really only see half the piece during the end of the finish, but after it had dried inside, the look of this piece is just absolutely beautiful. The dark chocolate browns contrasted with the natural grain of the Wenge just really stands out, and having this in our bedroom, which is more darker woods with some lighter contrasts, this is going to fit right in. Plus, it has more than enough slots than what we're actually going to need to use right away, and it's going to enable us to drop that power strip out of sight. So our room's just going to look a heck of a lot better for this.
And there you have it, a beautiful chocolate brown Wenge cable holder, which I was able to make for less than the cost of purchasing one of a less fancy wood that I would have had to wait for, and maybe then do some finishing and customization on. Now, this does assume that you have a few DIY things, specifically a table saw and a hand sander. So if you're into DIY, this is super easy. If you're not, maybe buy the pre-made one and leave creating something like this to the people who have the tools. So this is just a fun little project. I know I promised a DM screen tutorial for today, but just a couple things. So many things are in play over for loot tables that I didn't have time to do that. I will try to do that very soon. I think I have another dice video coming out next weekend. Also, I know last video I just thanked everybody for 100 subscribers, so thank you for 150. We've grown by 50% in the last week, which is insane. So just thank you all so much for the support, for everything that we're doing. I don't know, this is mine, but if you want to see some of the other projects I'm doing, pick up some of the dice that I've been making, head over to loottables.com. I'll have links to all of that in the description. But yeah, that's just another fun little DIY project that I did in an afternoon. All of this was recorded one t-shirt, one afternoon, and it was just a fun daytime project because the weather was so beautiful. I was inspired to come out here and do something. So until next time, everybody be good to each other, and I will see you around.